Hi guys, what's going on? I'm Matt, as Claire mentioned, co-founder of Nucleo, and today we'll be talking about kind of a different note from our before, but titled "There Will Be No PostWeb Society Without Education," and some lessons that we learned from running the first private DAO. Talking about privacy and the value of privacy, and how it may not be as valuable as our information bubble here thinks it is. But I want to start with the post-web society that we all want to build, and kind of where is society going if we don't bring privacy to on-chain orgs. So, as Claire mentioned, I came from a clean tech background and got to watch how the whole world is moving towards owning nothing and having zero privacy, and we're being told by the WEF that life will never be better. Got to see firsthand how if you want to do any clean tech and distributed systems, you have to give away half your company to Saudi Arabia or do the Elon Musk and have enough capital to start it yourself, and then every energy system is going to be owned by Elon, run by Elon, and we're going to use Elon's Twitter. He'll acquire SoundCloud, so we'll have to listen to Elon's music. I don't know. So we want to build a world where that's not the case, and that's kind of what motivates and excites us about bringing privacy to on-chain orgs. So what does Nucleo do? We started with the ConstitutionDAO and just the simple idea of like, hey, let's add some privacy to it. And we found that it was turtles all the way down, so we actually realized you have to build private multisigs because that didn't exist yet. And then over the course of 2022 and 2023, we built private multisigs, private fundraising, private DeFi, private voting, some private games, and some more. So, brings us to our talk, information bubbles and the value prop of privacy. So, I want to explore the idea that I feel like is underappreciated or underdiscussed in the privacy groups around how privacy tech actually shards information that is available to different user groups. It's good that it's not available to a Chainalysis agent, but different user groups value different information, and we kind of complicate the story of privacy by not really talking about it. So I want to bring that to everyone's attention. So, actually, can I go back? No, I don't know how. Can I get a quick raise of hands of everyone that's heard of ConstitutionDAO? Okay, it looks like everyone in the room. Can I get a quick raise of hands of everyone that's heard of ConstitutionDAO2? All right, we got maybe a 10th. So that's kind of what I was expecting, and the reason why I was expecting that is because ConstitutionDAO2, if you look at the dates on this, happened in December/November of last year. If you guys remember, that was also peak bear market, FTX crashing. There was some other stuff in the news. And what actually happened was that we had been in private beta testing out this private multisig for groups when all of a sudden Sothebys came out saying that the last privately held copy of the Constitution, the same one that was auctioned off in ConstitutionDAO in 2021, was going to be put for auction again. And they came up to us saying like, hey, do you guys want to bid on it? We said, hey, this is a terrible time for crypto, but I think we have the tech and I think we can throw it together. Do you guys think you could push back? And they promptly said no. The seller said that they were going to go through with the sale anyways, so we had to see like, all right, is there enough groups to gather momentum and do this thing? So we ended up getting a coalition of 16 different orgs. We had 3 privacy groups, and then the rest were DAOs. The privacy groups were interested for use cases of privacy, and the DAOs were interested much more on like, hey, let's bring DAOs to light and show positivity that DAOs can do, because we were hammered through 2022 on DAOs just look kind of like scams. So that's what was motivation for some of the groups. And getting into it, I kind of want to just give an agenda overview of the rest of this talk. So first things first is just giving a framework around organizations and kind of the information flows within them to kind of like ground ourselves. And then take us to number 2 is like the actual tech architecture of ConstitutionDAO2 to kind of see how we could potentially preserve some of those information flows that traditional orgs have. And then chapter 3, getting into like the value prop of privacy from different POVs of the user groups and what led us to that actual architecture. And chapter 4 is zooming out and looking at a postmortem and lessons learned. So chapter 1, just the framework of an organization and its information flows. I stole this lovely chart from the World Economic Forum, the same one that told us we'll have no privacy and we'll be happy. So they typically look at a business as kind of opaque to everyone outside of it, but a business will interact with shareholders, lenders, customers, suppliers, employees, the state and society, and the economy. So everything in that business that's going on may be opaque to each one of those stakeholders, and the business will have privacy around all of its information and can disclose accordingly. Where are we at now in Web3? Well, if you know on-chain orgs, you know it looks like this. Everything is completely viewable to everyone. So what if we just naively operate in a ZKP privacy protocol like Alio, as mentioned? Do you get this? I would like to point out that you don't get that. In fact, you get something closer to that. So everything is opaque to everyone. That's a little bit of a problem. So how do we get to this, where the business can kind of control its opaqueness from that? Well, I would like to draw attention to the fact that, is this even accurate? Obviously, I'm being reductionist on a lot of this, but I would like to call out that this is not quite accurate. It looks more like this. You get to control and selectively disclose what information you release to some people. You know, your business may have a bunch of logs on how your servers are doing and different information that you're handling from different areas. Your shareholders don't give a crap about that information. You get to control what goes out to them. They may care more about financials, business plans, et cetera. So this is actually what it looks like in this whole stakeholder model. You have different parties seeing different data, and you want to be able to selectively show different ones. And I like to summarize this by saying different parties value different data differently. Data has inherent value, but it's dependent on what user group you're talking to, and that's what I want to walk through here. So how do we get to that from that? That's what we're really going for. Issue with how ZKP-based privacy chains interoperate. This is really small, but it is a meme to just show that in ZKP privacy world, you kind of shard your application state based on a user's private keys and account keys. And you have now sharded the application state and the data that is viewable to a person dependent on who is actually interacting with this app. So let's say you have 4 different users interacting with some application. Let's say it's a DAO's application. Right now, in the way that these ZKP privacy protocols are implemented, your keys are actually, your data on these chains is encrypted to your own local keys, and it's not shared amongst anyone else. So that gets us to the architecture of ConstitutionDAO2 and its information flows and what that actually looks like whenever it is. How do we solve this problem of this sharded private state? So look at this in detail for a private multi-sig setting. So what you'll see on the top is the plain text, what actually is inside a UTXO note on these ZKP privacy chains. It's usually encrypted with a view key, and that turns that data, your value, your token, your owner, into ciphertext. And then what you do is you say, hey, these are the inputs of this transaction I want to do. I'll sign that these are valid inputs and this is the transaction I want to do. You'll compute the outputs. You'll do a proof of this whole state transition. And then you'll send to some node on the network my input nullifiers, my output notes, and my proof, so you have privacy. Issue with Aztec Connect, where we first implemented this, is that for usability, they hijack MetaMask and deterministically use your one user signature to generate your view keys and your spending keys, which is the view key mentioned there and secret key for signing. So you'll see that you just sign that message to get your Aztec privacy key. I don't think the video is going to play, but it's MetaMask shaking its head, saying that's not good. Because they're both encrypted to the same key. So that's the issue here. You'll see red box, red box. Those are all dependent on a user, so all the information for a certain account is encrypted to one user's key by default. So we looked at a couple options. There's option 1, can we get a multi-sig private smart contract? You immediately run into the issue, at least for Aztec Connect, that they only support 3 circuit types. You can make a custom circuit, but then they'd have to update their whole system. That doesn't quite work. Noir isn't ready for it to work yet. So that's kind of off the table. Can you use some, I don't know, module on Gnosis Safe to be able to kind of get around this problem? There's some ideas that we could play with, but at the end of the day, you end up revealing privacy for any of your transactions if you're doing anything on the private chain. So what we kind of ended up with is using threshold multi-sig signatures. So we used a thing called Speedy Music for the actual like signing of that state transition for proofs. And then question is, what do we do for the view key if in this threshold signature scheme with Speedy Music, we have no private keys? Well, we just made one. We just made a new seed, and we called this, hey, everything, all the data should be encrypted to this seed, and now everyone in this on-chain org should share and keep this seed on their clients that they're using to access. So this is, in general, our architecture for private multisig on Aztec Connect. Skipped over a lot of things. But I want to keep this in mind as like, hey, we have sharded private data on these privacy chains. This is how we can get around it. We get a view key that is shared amongst a lot of different people, and then now they could decrypt the data on the actual chain. So what's the value of this thing? Well, for ConstitutionDAO specifically, it is that, hey, billionaire Ken Griffin stole it last time out of the DAO's hands. And why did he? Because his son asked him to. His son thought it would be hilarious. He could see the total amount that they had to bid, and his son was just like, hey, yeah, go do that. So it would be valuable to any ConstitutionDAO2 org by avoiding front running, protecting account info, and protection for real world businesses. So I want to call attention that this actually isn't the full picture, because private multisig doesn't give you, hey, how much momentum does the DAO have? Do I have to give my view key to every single person that contributes to be able to see how much progress our DAO has? So the privacy aspect isn't actually valuable to a lot. So we had to rework our architecture, build a custom solution for the DAO in a very short time period just to solve for a bunch of issues. And what we landed on was this. So we ran a private and public fundraise where the DAO had a multisig on Ethereum that was public, that was a safe, and then it used Juicebox to issue out NFTs to everyone that contributed to the DAO's fundraise. And then for private multisig, we had us inside of Aztec, and then we also used Sysmo to issue out any ZK NFTs to preserve privacy there. So it was a DAO with a private and public component for the first time. We also had to add a bunch of stuff on the privacy land because we learned that privacy isn't that valuable to a ton of different users. In fact, they need transparency or they need traceability and auditability on some stuff. So we added these audit keys that you can see here on auditors. Some auditors really wanted to know like every single transaction history that ever interacted with the multisig and what addresses came from that. And some wanted to see the value to be able to do any OTC swaps. And then on the actual website, people wanted to see momentum that was happening on the private contribution side, so we added feeds for public and private contributions. So now I want to dive into what the value prop of privacy is from the specific user groups. And we can fly by this one because it should be pretty intuitive once I spell it out. So quick view of ConstitutionDAO2 and its stakeholders. You'll see that it may have shareholders or owners that are people that have contributed a lot of money. Like we had one person that contributed like 100K. We had another DAO that put in like 25K. So those may be higher stakes owners versus general DAO members, someone that contributes just like $100 or something. We have an actual private core team that had their names on legal docs for the actual DAO's organization interfacing with real world assets and groups. And that takes us to the real world asset group, which is Sothebys, who is holding that auction. We have capital partners like OTC desks, so we could do ETH to USD trades to be able to make the Sothebys transaction. We had state and society issues with Chainalysis that we'll get to in a bit, and then just generally the economy. So as mentioned before, we kind of want to do some selective disclosure of data because different data is valuable to different parties differently. So first issue was with the general high stakes ownership groups. They really thought that building public momentum was essential for success. So that means revealing data around how much is in the existing funds, what are the number of unique people contributing, what are any well-known people contributing, what are any well-known whales contributing, and privacy was just straight up not valuable for that data. That was something that is just like, hey, we want to garner momentum. We want people to be excited about this. So user group number 2, just general DAO members. Issue with privacy was around the auditability side and to get contract-like guarantees. So there's an issue with contributors just frustrated with the private DAO side, where how do you check that no funds have left the private multisig without sharing the view key to every single one of those people and then not really knowing what they're doing with that? How do you prove the view key history is even given that's correct? How do you make sure that there's not like 5 different private multisigs and you're not changing it? And then how do you block private transactions or balance autonomy for like spending limits, for instance? Like how do we make sure that this private multisig doesn't spend 10,000 of the DAO's funds without permission? How do we know as public DAO members that that hasn't happened? So privacy actually hurt the value prop here because it was a bit frustrating. You know, they wanted to be able to audit all transactions and have smart contract-like guarantees. That's what they're used to in public DAOs right now. So also with DAO members, there was an issue around private versus public DAO contributors. So do we reward private contributors more than public because it was more valuable in this use case? Well, then why would anyone contribute to public? Because public has value around gaining momentum. So how do we kind of balance the value of those two there? And then private contributors also had some frustrations with the privacy tech and just some tech nuances where how do you check your contribution was made to the private multisig without basically putting state management all onto the front end that actually could grab a user's ephemeral key that they use to make a deposit into the multisig. So how do you check those previous contributions was tough. So from the private core team's angle, they were worried about intermingling with illicit funds on Aztec, so there was an actual legal risk to not just the DAO, but the DAO core team members that had their names on like the organizational piece of papers here, and they really needed a ton of education on how it even worked because they wanted proof that like, hey, if I have this view key, how can I show that no one else has interacted with my account that came from illicit funds, and who would believe that? How strong is that evidence? How strong is this tech? They wanted a provability on the transaction graph for nodes that an account had. So privacy decreased the value there by introducing a new legal risk, but that could be mitigated with education, which is why I say that we need more education because this sucked to deal with. Then there was the same case at Sothebys and the OTC desks. So they had the same exact hesitations, and this also sucked to deal with because it almost killed the entire thing from even happening. And we had to build these audit views and this auditability, traceability for them to be able to go and look at all the transactions that existed. And then they were even frustrated because they all use Chainalysis, and they're used to Chainalysis. They just put in one address, and then it spits out a whole transaction graph of what they did. Chainalysis doesn't work that way with Aztec Connect, and it can't. So they had to manually go through all the people that transacted with it, and they were very frustrated by that as well. So it introduced legal risk, and it introduced more time on their ends than they were used to in public land. Other little thing on auditability was that the OTC desks that weren't on the compliance teams didn't really care about where the money came from. In all honesty, they didn't need that view. They just wanted to see the value and just cared about different rates around how quickly we can exchange our ETH, because we were doing the fundraise in ETH to USDC, and then what the price changes were then so that they can guarantee for us. Privacy introduced a little bit of a timing issue. This is more of like an L2 to L1 thing than it was privacy, but it is something I wanted to call out. And lastly, we had to deal with a very frustrating problem of Chainalysis saying that they were going to flag all of the user addresses that interact with Aztec if we were doing this fundraise through Aztec Connect, to which we had to wonder, like, why are you flagging Aztec through this? Is there any way that you don't flag every single user that just comes into our thing? Because the DAO at the beginning said we had to, you know, use Chainalysis to make sure that no illicit funds came in through our front end. Last but not least, with all of those concerns, we also had big infighting amongst the devs and the tech integration to build this, where we experimented with Create 2 addresses. We looked at the same setup that they used for Victory auctions on chain, and we found that just based on the user groups, these naive implementations of privacy for auctions don't exactly work for the actual needs of the users. So the end architecture is what we kind of showed here, but I did want to call out that this is all based on all of those discussions with all the different user groups there. So zooming out, very quick here, ConstitutionDAO2 postmortem and lessons learned. Me in 2021 was like, let's just add privacy. We'll end this capitalism problem that I found in the clean tech distributed systems world. It'll make everything great. Found out like, hey, people in DAO land were like, yeah, I don't know if there'd be that much interest in it. Then comes up a use case where there's obvious interest in it. Then we have to solve this, hey, you sharded the application state. Who can actually view what data? Cool. Now you deal with a crap ton of user education with all these different parties that want to kill it because they don't know how any of this thing works and they just see public news sources that say privacy is bad. Then you get a lot of confusion in the tech world around like, hey, what different tech solutions should we use to do this? And then it's just hard. It's just hard to build private dApps. So all of this for what? Well, we raised $500,000 for DAO and only 15% of it came in through private donations. And not just that, it's the realization that like, look at all these very public chains, and then look at Aztec Connect, what we were using there, and it is like 2 orders of magnitude less. So, question that I want to pose to everyone in this group to think hard about and actually put into practice is, this is our messaging about privacy right now. We say Ethereum encrypted, we say applications become private, we say building a private internet for everyone, and we all think that people value privacy the same way, and I don't think we'll get there from here. I think that we really need to think hard about the different user groups and how they value privacy differently and how they value different data to be private differently. Why do I say that? I think we're a little bit in a bubble. I think that this is our area here. I think we're in a little bit in a bubble based on our experience because the Web3 media bubble on privacy is talking about like, hey, there's this trade-off between privacy and convenience. Like, we still want it. It's a big R&D effort. Like, Vitalik, it's one of the 3 pillars in the 3 transitions that he just named out. But Web 2 doesn't value privacy at all. In fact, they associate it with drugs in the dark web. They associate it with money laundering by North Korea. And even organizations and the workers in those organizations associate privacy with like the bourgeois trying to steal us from getting better wages. Like, privacy is in a pretty bad messaging in that information bubble. And even in Web3, it is not like fully sold in on it yet. You'll get things like this around like, hey, there's risk on AML stuff and privacy coins and self-hosted wallets that people like us have to worry about. So, is there any hope for privacy products? The cut? Yes. But we have to think we have to think very hard on where the value comes from in privacy. There are these Web 2 media examples where they very much say, hey, with privacy, you could have kept your personal data from being exposed in this hack, or you just don't get hijacked by Sam Altman for using every single one of your Getty images in his AI model. So, thing that you can't get there from here. Sharded information poses a serious problem for user habits today. Those user habits are what makes the idea of different users value different information differently. Sharded information poses a serious problem for the value of privacy products. But there's exciting news. Privacy and ownership is a new power, and the value of that is unknown. And based on our experience, the devs and the DAOs we've worked with, they're unlikely to figure out. I'd bet it's more the people in this room. So we get the fun job of educating on the tech and emphasizing the ensuing value and experimenting and building it and seeing how we make that work. So how might we get there? We could potentially add some novel incentives around privacy. We can emphasize the value being created for users and not just messaging to people generically like, hey, don't you want this private thing? Like, yeah, maybe people don't want that private thing. They want to know what data is private. They want to know, like, hey, this thing is valuable to me to be private, but this isn't valuable to me to be private. And then brand and marketing to tie that innovative privacy tech to the value being created by it. Some hopeful examples, I think Anoma and Namada's work on treating privacy as a public good and actually incentivizing it is a fantastic example of experimenting around this. And I think Penumbra has done a great job actually hammering home the value of like, you're not broadcasting your personal information on private financial trades. And these are much better than just Ethereum encrypted or make applications private. I think this specific thing is something that really gets to users and would mediate a lot of the issues that we found from ConstitutionDAO2. So we're going to put our money where our mouth is too, and we are excited to announce that our initial branding of Nucleo and a private multisig to make it private, we learned a lot of lessons there that, hey, maybe that's not the best way of harping on value of privacy and the innovative tech. So we're evolving. Yeah, that's right. We got colors of us evolving. So we are changing our name to Puzzle, and we are rebranding to continue on this journey. And it does better to communicate the value of the cryptography and the privacy to the actual value that it brings to users. And we're excited to share more as we continue building. So. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I'm not a tech girl. I'm just a sales girl. And my question is, how this whole privacy issue conflicts with hacking? Because right now the most private guys are hackers. So I don't understand.
Yeah, no, this is actually, that's a great question. To repeat the question to everyone else, it's, like most of the privacy right now, it sounds like it comes from hackers. That's what I kind of wanted to get at around, like, I think we're kind of in a bubble that really values privacy for good reasons here. But other media bubbles paint privacy as just for hackers. And that's actually what we ran into while trying to use like a user-facing organizational privacy product, was just so many people concerned that like, oh, isn't privacy tech just for hackers and just for hacking? And like, yeah, it was a big problem. It was probably one of the biggest problems from like just user adoption. So it almost got the ConstitutionDAO thing killed by 3 separate groups. So it's that image problem of privacy for hackers was a big issue that we faced.